The Seattle courthouse smelled like old wood polish and broken promises. I stood at the counsel table, my fingers pressed flat against the cool oak surface, trying to ground myself in something solid while everything around me felt like it was falling apart. Judge Thaddeus Crowe peered down from his bench like a hawk waiting for a slip-up. His black robes hung on his angular frame, and his thin lips curved into what might have been a smile if it had held any warmth. It did not. "Motion denied, Miss Kensington," he said, not even bothering to look at the paperwork Greer Halliday had just submitted. My lawyer, my friend, stood beside me, her jaw tight enough to crack teeth. Across the aisle, my father sat with the smug satisfaction of a man who had already won. Alistair Kensington, corporate tax attorney, master manipulator, and apparently professional grave robber. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his suit a bespoke masterpiece that made him far more striking than the attorney seated at his elbow. And his eyes, the same hazel as mine, held nothing but cold calculation as they met my gaze. Next to him, Gavin Prescott leaned back in his chair like he was at a country club instead of a courtroom. My father's lawyer had the kind of aggressive confidence that came from never having lost a case he had been willing to cheat to win. They whispered to each other, and I caught the edge of my father's quiet laugh. They looked like predators. I was supposed to be the prey. "Your Honor," Greer tried again, her voice steady despite the frustration I could see tightening the corners of her eyes. The decedent's will was crystal clear. Cecilia Thorne was of sound mind when she executed. "Miss Halliday," Judge Crowe interrupted, his tone dripping with condescension. "I had reviewed the materials. The court had concerns about undue influence and the decedent's mental state during her final months. Cancer treatments could be clouding." My mother's name in his mouth felt like a violation. Cecilia Thorne had been sharper in her last days than most people were on their best. The pancreatic cancer had taken her body, not her mind. But facts did not matter there, apparently. "We were requesting a 60-day continuance to conduct additional discovery," Prescott said, standing with theatrical slowness. My client had reason to believe there might be hidden assets, improper transfers. "Granted," Crowe said before Greer could object. "Of course he did." I closed my eyes for just a moment, fighting the wave of exhaustion that threatened to pull me under. 8 months. It had been 8 months since I had held my mother's hand as she took her last breath in that townhouse in Tacoma. 8 months since I had become an orphan at 30 years old because having a living father who would rather sue you than speak to you was basically the same thing. The inheritance was not even impressive. $83,000 in savings. A 2-bedroom townhouse in Tacoma with a mortgage still attached. An old oak chest that had been in Mom's family for generations, filled with quilts and photographs and the lingering scent of lavender. But then there was the asset I had never expected, a half-share in the beachfront villa they had bought together a lifetime ago. At that time, that villa was worth $5 million, and it had brought Mom a steady $5,000 a month as her half-share of the net rental proceeds. To me, that half-share was a life-changing fortune, a security blanket she had managed to keep. But to my father, it was just the missing piece he needed to complete his collection of coastal trophies. That was it. That was what Alistair Kensington, a man who billed $1,200 an hour, was willing to destroy his only daughter to claim. The irony was not lost on me. I had spent the last 5 years as a public defender, fighting for people who could. I had chosen that path specifically because it was everything he despised: messy, underpaid, focused on actual justice instead of billable hours and corporate tax shelters. "You are wasting your education," he had told me at my law school graduation. That was the last time we had spoken before Mom got sick. Public defense is for lawyers who cannot make it in real practice. I had chosen the UW specifically to stay close to Mom, after he had blown up our family for Tiffany Street. Claire, a paralegal 15 years, his junior with platinum blonde hair and the moral backbone of a jellyfish. I was 15 when it happened. 15 when I came home from school to find Mom crying at the kitchen table in our Bellevue house, divorce papers spread out in front of her like casualties of war. 15 when I learned that love could be a weapon, and that the man who had taught me to ride a bike could also destroy everything we had built without a second thought. The divorce had been brutal. Alistair had used every legal connection he had to force Mom into a corner. She had walked away with barely enough to survive, while he had kept climbing higher and higher. Corporate law, partnership, that big corner office downtown with the view of Elliott Bay. Mom had taken a job as a part-time librarian. She had smiled through it, told me she was happy, that books were better company than lawyers anyway. But I had seen how thin she had gotten, not from cancer yet, but from the quiet devastation of being erased by someone who had promised to love her forever. Miss Kensington? Judge Crow's voice snapped me back to the present. Do you have anything to add? I looked up at him. This corrupt judge with his black robes and his bias so blatant it should have been grounds for immediate recusal. Then I looked at my father, who was already checking his phone like this was just another tedious appointment on his calendar. No, Your Honor, I said quietly. Greer touched my arm as we gathered our papers. We will figure this out, she whispered. This is not over. But it felt over. It felt like I was 15 again, watching my father take everything while I stood there, still naively believing that rules and fairness and justice actually meant something. As we walked out of the courtroom, I heard my father's voice behind me. Olivia. I stopped, turned. He stood there in the hallway, Prescott already heading toward the elevators. This does not have to be difficult, Alistair said, his tone almost gentle. Almost. Your mother was not well, you knew that. Just agree to mediation. We will split everything fairly, and we can both move on. Fairly. The word felt like a slap. She left everything to me, I said, my voice low and steady. Because you had already taken everything from her once. She wanted to make sure you could not do it again. Something flickered in his eyes. Anger, maybe. Or just annoyance that I was not rolling over the way Mom had been forced to. You are being emotional, he said. That is your problem, Olivia. You let feelings cloud your judgment. It is why you will never be a successful attorney. He walked away before I could respond, which was probably good, because what I had wanted to say would have gotten me cited for contempt. Greer and I rode the elevator down in silence. When we reached the lobby, she finally spoke. That was a disaster. I know. Crow was completely in your father's pocket. Every motion we filed, he was going to deny. Every request they made, he was going to grant. She stopped, turned to face me. Olivia, I needed you to be realistic here. We might lose this. Your father had resources, connections. I know, I said again, because what else was there to say? I drove home to Tacoma in a daze, the rain streaking across my windshield like tears I was too angry to cry. I-5 was a nightmare, a stagnant snarl of red brick. The townhouse felt empty when I let myself in, filled with boxes I still had not unpacked, furniture that still smelled like my mother's perfume. I dropped my briefcase by the door and stood in the living room, surrounded by the modest life my mother had built from the ruins my father had left her. This was not just a lawsuit, this was erasure. This was my father's final act of control, his last chance to prove that even in death, Cecilia Thorne belonged to him, and I was still playing by the rules. Still believing that if I just filed the right motions, presented the right evidence, spoke the right words, then justice would prevail. Naive, foolish, weak. Everything my father had always said I was. I looked around the townhouse, my mother's legacy, the only thing standing between her memory and complete annihilation, and felt something crack inside my chest. Maybe it was time to stop playing fair. Maybe it was time to learn how to fight the way my father did. I just did not know how yet. If you were in Olivia's shoes grieving, getting crushed by the system, would you keep playing by the rules even though you're losing? Or is it time to get your hands dirty and burn your father's world down? Integrity or revenge? What's your move? The next morning, I called in sick to work. The King County Public Defender's Office was accustomed to burned-out attorneys taking mental health days, so nobody questioned it. I spent the morning sorting through boxes in the spare bedroom, but it was a dead end. I found nothing that could actually help our case, just a mountain of paper that proved nothing to a biased court. Exhausted, my gaze drifted until it settled on the oak chest in the corner. It sat against the wall like it had been part of the room's architecture, its dark wood worn smooth by generations of hands. Mom had kept it in her bedroom for as long as I could remember. As a child, I had been fascinated by it, the carved flowers on the lid, the heavy brass hinges, the way it smelled like cedar and thyme when you opened it. That had been in my family for 4 generations. Mom had told me once, "My great-grandmother brought it west when she came to Washington. Someday it will be yours." Someday had come too soon. I knelt in front of it, running my fingers over the carved wood. It was the only thing from the inheritance my father had not specifically challenged in his lawsuit. Too sentimental, maybe, no monetary value, just an old box full of memories. I lifted the lid, the familiar smell of lavender and cedar wafted out. Inside, she kept the fragments of our lives. Mom's wedding quilt, baby blankets she had made for me, old family portraits from better days, the tarnished little medals I had won in grade school. Even the crude plastic bracelets I had clumsily made for her as a child. She had kept every single thing in this chest. To my father, it was junk. To her, it was a sanctuary. But as I lifted out the bottom quilt, my hand brushed against something that did not feel right. The wood at the base of the chest felt different, hollow. My heart started beating faster. I ran my fingers along the seam, pressing, searching. There, a small indentation, barely visible. I pressed it, and a section of the bottom lifted away, a hidden compartment. My hands were shaking as I reached inside. The space was shallow but long, built into the false bottom of the chest. I pulled out a stack of yellowed documents, bound together with a length of frayed, weathered twine. Beneath them, a diary. The leather cover was cracked and dusty, the pages brittle with age. I sat back on my heels, my mind reeling. Mom had kept secrets. Mom, who had been the most transparent person I had ever known, who had taught me that honesty was the foundation of integrity, had hidden something important enough to build a secret compartment for it. I opened the diary first. The handwriting was my mother's, but younger, more energetic than the shaky script of her final months. It began on a rainy mid-March day in 1994. Assignment to Operation Iron Harbor confirmed. They say it signals intelligence, that we're helping protect the country. The JAG advisors seem competent. Kensington is charming. Crow is brilliant. I'm honored to be part of this team. I stopped breathing. Operation Iron Harbor, JAG advisors, Kensington and Crow. My father and the judge currently destroying me in court. I flipped through the pages, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold the diary. Mom's entries grew darker as the seasons changed. By early June of that same year, the tone had shifted entirely. Something's wrong. The surveillance scope keeps expanding. We're not just monitoring external threats anymore. Crow is pushing to include domestic targets, activists, journalists, anyone who might compromise operational security. Kensington supports him. He says we need to be pragmatic. In late August, the reality set in. They're using the intelligence for personal gain. I've seen the reports, information being shared with corporate contacts, politicians, people who have nothing to do with national security. Crow and Kensington have turned this into their own private I tried to raise concerns, but Major Fisk shut me down. Operational necessity, he said. I don't believe him anymore. Mid-October brought the breaking point. Marcus Webb is dead. They're calling it an accident, a car crash, single vehicle, late at night. But Marcus was the civil rights activist who was about to expose the contractor fraud at the base. He'd been under surveillance, our surveillance. 3 days before he died, I saw Crow reviewing his file, taking notes. Now Marcus is gone and the investigation is closed. Tragic accident. I want to vomit. I had to stop reading. My vision was blurring, my breath coming in short gasps. My mother. My gentle, kind mother who had worked in a library and made quilts and cried at Hallmark commercials. She had been a United States Air Force signals specialist. She had worked on classified operations. She had witnessed corruption, murder, and she had kept it secret for over 25 years. I turned to the documents beneath the diary, photocopies of reports, heavily redacted but still legible. Names, dates, operational codes, and photographs. The photographs. 2 young men in military dress uniforms, standing with a group of officers. One was clearly my father, the same sharp jawline, the same cold eyes, though his hair was dark brown instead of silver. The other was Thaddeus Crow, younger and leaner but unmistakable. They were laughing in the photo, arms around each other's shoulders like brothers. I spread the documents out on the floor, trying to piece together the timeline. My parents had met during Operation Iron Harbor. Mom was the signals specialist. Dad was a contract lawyer and reserve JAG officer. They had fallen in love while committing acts that would end both their careers if exposed. When Mom had started asking questions and threatened to report what she knew, my father did not just disagree, he used their future as a shield. He promised her that if she only gave him time, he would set everything in order. But the ultimatum was clear. If she exposed even a fragment of the truth, that future would be extinguished right then and there. The final entry, written in November of 1994, was the most devastating. I'm leaving the service. I can't be part of this anymore. Alistair says I'm being dramatic, that I need to understand how the real world works. He says if I speak up, I'll destroy both our careers. And for what? Marcus Webb is already dead. Nothing will bring him back. The verification code for everything we've done is Amber Horizon. Alistair and Crow know it, so does Fisk. If anything happens to me, if anyone ever needs proof that's the key to unlock it all, I'm pregnant. I found out yesterday. I'm going to marry Alistair and raise our child far away from all of this. Maybe I'm a coward. Maybe I'm just trying to protect the life growing inside me, but I can't fight them. They're too powerful, and I'm too afraid. I was that child, the reason my mother had stayed silent, the reason she had married a man who had helped cover up a murder. Their departure from the service wasn't a retreat, it was a surgical reconstruction of the past. While Alistair utilized his JAG authority to bury the Marcus Webb case under mountains of red tape and top-secret classifications, my mother was the ghost in the machine, quietly scrubbing the digital fingerprints from the signals logs. They walked off that base with honorable discharges in hand, the golden ticket Alistair needed to waltz into Seattle's top-tier firms without ever fearing a background check. They manufactured themselves into model citizens by incinerating the truth, leaving behind a dead man and a ghost operation called Iron Harbor that the world would never have known existed, if not for that oak chest. I sat on the floor of the spare bedroom, surrounded by the evidence of my parents' past crimes, and felt the last pieces of my naive worldview shatter. Judge Thaddeus Crow was not assigned to my case by accident. My father had arranged it, his old colleague, his partner in crime, his insurance policy. They had gotten away with corruption and murder for 3 decades, and now they were working together again to steal my mother's legacy. The betrayal went so much deeper than I had imagined. Mom had kept these secrets to protect me. She had stayed silent, enduring a marriage where the love flowed in only one direction, letting my father walk all over her because speaking up would have destroyed me too. She had poured her heart into a void, sacrificing her integrity to protect the child born from that hollow devotion, the daughter of criminals, the child born from a union forged in cover-ups and lies. But she had left me the evidence, hidden it in the oak chest she knew would come to me, left me the verification code, the key to everything, Amber Horizon. The confusion and grief that had been weighing me down since Mom's death crystallized into something else. Something cold and sharp and focused. Fury. I pulled out my phone and called Greer. She answered on the second ring. "Olivia, are you okay?" "I found something," I said, my voice steady despite the rage burning in my chest. "Leverage. I cannot explain everything yet, but I need you to trust me." "What kind of leverage?" "The kind that ends this case, but I need to verify some details first." There was a pause. "Olivia, if you have evidence of judicial misconduct..." "I do, but it is bigger than that. Just trust me, please." Another pause. Then, "Okay, I trust you, but be careful. If your father finds out you have something on him..." "He will not until I am ready." I hung up and stared at the documents spread across the floor. This was not just about the inheritance anymore. This was about justice for my mother, justice for Marcus Webb. Justice for everyone my father and Crow had crushed under their expensive shoes on their climb to power. I could not tell Greer everything yet. The fewer people who knew, the safer they would be. This had to be strategic, calculated. I had to become the kind of lawyer my father had always wanted me to be: ruthless, pragmatic, willing to win at any cost. The difference was, I would still be fighting for the right side. I gathered the documents carefully, took photos of everything with my phone, and packed every scrap of paper my mother had left behind into my private luggage, a space that was strictly off-limits to anyone else. Then I sat at my laptop and started making a list. Names to verify, people who might remember Operation Iron Harbor, anyone who could confirm what my mother had documented. This was my first small strategic move, keeping the secret, protecting my sources, and planning my revenge with the precision of a surgeon. My father had taught me to fight fair. My mother had taught me to fight for what was right. Now I was going to teach both of them what happened when you underestimated Olivia Kensington. The prey was about to become the predator. And they would never see it coming. Let's talk about Cecilia Thorne. Is she a tragic victim who sacrificed her soul to protect her daughter? Or was she just a coward? Does she deserve our sympathy? The envelope arrived on a Wednesday morning, slipped through my mail slot like a viper through tall grass. I had been awake since 4, nursing cold coffee at my kitchen table in the Tacoma townhouse, watching dawn break gray and uninviting over the sound. Sleep had become a stranger these past weeks. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Judge Crow's smug face, heard my father's lawyer dismantling my mother's final wishes with ruthless precision. Inside, Gavin Prescott's latest salvo was dressed in the polite language of legal procedure, but the message was clear as broken glass. They wanted everything sealed for comprehensive appraisal, not just Mom's savings but her personal effects, every photograph, every letter, every piece of her they could inventory and price like merchandise at an estate sale. My hands trembled as I read the list. They were trying to strip away every physical memory I had of her. This was not about money anymore, if it ever really was. This was about erasing Cecilia Thorne from existence, reducing 30 years of her life to a line item in a probate filing. I set the letter down carefully, afraid I might tear it to shreds otherwise. The diary sat beside me, wrapped in an old silk scarf. I had barely slept since finding it, reading and rereading those precise coded entries. Operation Iron Harbor, the careful documentation of something that made powerful men nervous even decades later. Mom's handwriting filled those pages, steady, methodical, damning. But I could not just walk into court waving a diary. I needed corroboration. I needed people who could confirm what Mom had witnessed, who could verify that this was not the paranoid fantasy of a dying woman, as Prescott would inevitably claim. I needed proof that would stand up, even if I never used it in court. Mom's diary mentioned colleagues by first names only, sometimes just initials. I started with her old address book, cross-referenced names against military records I could access through public databases, called every B. Vance in the Pacific Northwest, until my voice went hoarse. Finally, I found her. Beatrice Vance lived in a modest ranch house in Olympia, surrounded by vibrant peonies she probably fussed over every spring. She answered the door with the cautious wariness of someone who had learned not to trust unexpected visitors. "Miss Vance? My name is Olivia Kensington. I am Cecilia Thorne's daughter." Her face transformed. The wariness melted into something softer, sadder. "Oh, honey, I heard about Cecilia. I am so sorry." She was, her voice caught. She was one of the good ones. Over tea in her sun-drenched kitchen, Beatrice confirmed what the diary had only hinted at. Yes, she had worked signals with Mom in the late 90s. Yes, there had been an operation classified, sensitive, the kind that made careers for some people and destroyed others. And yes, there were men who had bent the rules, who had treated military resources like personal playgrounds. "Your mother kept records," Beatrice said quietly, stirring honey into her cup. Not because she wanted to hurt anyone, because she believed in accountability, in doing things the right way. She looked up at me, her eyes fierce. Alistair Kensington and Thaddeus Crow? They thought they were untouchable. Maybe they still do. "Can you testify to that?" She hesitated. "If I absolutely had to, yes. But Olivia, these men have long memories and longer reach. You need to be very, very careful." I left with her phone number programmed into my cell and a lead on the second name, Colonel Harrison Fiske. Tracking down a retired colonel turned out to be easier than finding a civilian. Fiske had an office at a veterans advocacy nonprofit in Seattle, where he spent his days helping former service members navigate VA bureaucracy. When I called, He was exactly what I had pictured. Ramrod straight posture, steel gray crew cut, handshake that could crack walnuts. We sat in his Spartan office, and I laid out what I knew carefully, watching his reaction. When I mentioned Operation Iron Harbor, his jaw tightened. When I said Amber Horizon, he went very still. Where did you hear that phrase? His voice was quiet, controlled, but I caught the edge underneath. My mother's diary. She kept personal notes. Nothing classified, just observations, records of irregularities. Fisk leaned back in his chair, studying me with the intensity of someone used to evaluating threats and assets. Amber Horizon is a verification code. It was tied to the encrypted communication logs for Iron Harbor. Your mother would only know that phrase if she had access to those systems. He paused. The official logs are still sealed in government archives. Classified. Will be for another 20 years, minimum. My heart hammered against my ribs, but Mom's personal notes were not classified. She was smart enough to keep her documentation separate. Observations, timeline discrepancies, budget irregularities, things she noticed that pointed to larger problems without revealing operational details. He met my eyes. Your mother was protecting people, Olivia, including herself, including you, and those notes. That is the weapon your mother left for you. You know the players. You know what they did. Now, use that secret wisely. I left his office with something more valuable than testimony. I left with a weapon. The truth was both a loaded gun and a live grenade. Mom had kept this secret for decades, carrying it quietly to protect our family from the fallout. And now Dad was trampling on that sacrifice, trying to erase her from history because it was convenient for him. The anger that had been simmering since the first hearing crystallized into something colder, sharper, strategic. I called Greer Halliday from my car, still parked outside Fiskey's building. I found it, I said when she answered. I found the leverage. We met at a coffee shop in Capitol Hill, tucked into a back corner booth where the espresso machine's hiss provided cover. I walked her through everything, the diary, the witnesses, the code phrase that could crack this case wide open. Greer listened without interrupting, her lawyer brain processing angles and risks. When I finished, she set down her matte stoneware mug and fixed me with a serious look. Olivia, this is nuclear. You understand that, right? I understand. If you reveal classified information even accidentally, even in a courtroom you could face federal charges. They do not care that it is your mother's legacy or that you are fighting corruption. The government protects its secrets. I know. That is why I am not planning to reveal anything classified. I leaned forward. I just need them to know that I could, that I have access to information that would bury them both. Greer's eyes gleamed with understanding. A threat. Implicit but unmistakable. Exactly. We spent the next 2 hours mapping out the strategy. On the surface, we would continue fighting the probate case on solid legal ground, testamentary capacity, proper execution, Mom's clear mental state when she drafted the will. We would present evidence, call witnesses, do everything by the book, but if Judge Crow remained blatantly biased, if he prepared to hand Dad everything on a corrupt silver platter, then I would use Amber Horizon, just the phrase, just enough to remind Alistair and Crow that Mom had not taken her secrets to the grave. That some truths, once documented, never really disappear. It is risky, Greer warned. If they call your bluff. It is not a bluff. I have corroboration from 2 witnesses. I have Mom's documentation. I have the verification code. And I have absolutely nothing left to lose. That night, back in my townhouse, I stood in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized myself. The woman staring back was not the naive public defender who had walked into Crow's courtroom 3 weeks ago, believing that justice meant following the rules and trusting the system. This woman had learned that sometimes the system was rigged, that sometimes the only way to fight corruption was to make the corrupt afraid. Mom's strength flowed through my veins like a transfusion. She had been brave enough to document the truth when it would have been easier to look away, brave enough to protect that documentation for decades, knowing it might one day matter. Now, it was my turn to be brave. I was not seeking Dad's approval anymore. I did not need Judge Crow to see me as anything other than a threat to his comfortable corruption. I held a secret that could end careers, destroy reputations, peel back the veneer of respectability these men had spent decades polishing, and I was absolutely willing to use it. The knock came at 8 in the morning, sharp, dry, and punctual enough to be an insult. I opened the door to two men from a Bellevue-based appraisal firm, the kind of professionals hired to look through the fog of grief and see only spreadsheets. They wore identification badges and carried iPads, digital cameras, and a roll of neon yellow barcode stickers. They didn't offer condolences. They only asked, "Are you Olivia Kensington? We're here under court order for a comprehensive inventory of the estate." I stood leaning against the kitchen doorframe, arms crossed, feeling the weight of the Operation Iron Harbor files tucked safely inside my personal leather briefcase in the next room. My mother's diary had been removed from the oak chest the night before. Now, whatever they were about to take was merely the hollow shell of a memory. The process was sickeningly efficient. They moved through the Tacoma townhouse like programmed ghosts. Every item my mother had once cherished received a cold touch and a label. Lot number 204. 3 boxes of miscellaneous paperback books. Estimated value, $40. Lot number 205. Collection of silk scarves. Estimated value, $150. Lot number 209. 1 oak chest, hand-carved with floral motifs, rusted brass hinges. When they lifted the chest, I held my breath for a heartbeat. It was empty, but the groan of the wood as it was hauled from its spot still made my chest tighten. They slapped a strip of red tape across the lid. Property of estate, pending appraisal. They didn't smell the lavender. They didn't see the decades she spent sitting beside it, stitching together the broken pieces of our lives. They only saw a piece of furniture that needed to be moved to a climate-controlled warehouse. "We're transporting these items to the central facility for detailed valuation per Mr. Prescott's request," the lead appraiser said, his eyes never leaving his screen. "You are permitted to remain on the premises, but any items currently under seal are not to be disturbed or removed until further notice from the court." I watched the white, unmarked van pull away from the curb, carrying the last physical fragments of my mother's existence. The house felt cavernous now, marked only by the rectangular dust outlines where her legacy used to be. Prescott thought he had disarmed me. He thought that by sealing these memories, he had successfully locked away the past. He didn't know that the only thing capable of incinerating his career, and my father's with it, was sitting right at my feet, hidden inside the briefcase of a public defender who no longer believed in playing fair. Does Olivia play the Amber Horizon card right now just to kick these guys out, or does she suck it up and wait to deliver the killing blow? Are you team instant payback or team the long game? The courthouse felt different on the morning of the continued hearing. Maybe it was just my perception, but even the marble columns seemed to lean in with anticipation, waiting to see how this tragedy would end. I dressed carefully, charcoal suit, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a severe bun, the costume of a woman who had already lost, and knew it. Greer met me on the steps, her expression deliberately neutral. "Ready?" she asked quietly. I was born ready for this. We entered courtroom 6 at exactly 9 o'clock. Dad was already seated at the plaintiff's table with Gavin Prescott, who looked like a shark who had scented blood in the water. They both watched us cross the room with barely concealed satisfaction. Judge Thaddeus Crowe swept in at 9:15, his black robe billowing dramatically. He settled behind the bench like a king assuming his throne, completely confident in his authority. "Let us proceed," he announced. "Mr. Prescott, you may continue." What followed was a masterclass in character assassination. Prescott attacked Mom's mental capacity with the fervor of a man who believed he had already won. He introduced medical records that described her final months, the pain medication, the exhaustion, the moments of confusion that any dying person might experience. He twisted every instance of human frailty into evidence of incompetence. "Ladies and gentlemen," Prescott intoned, though there was no jury, just Crowe's prejudiced ears, "we must ask ourselves, was Cecilia Thorne truly of sound mind when she drafted this will? Or was she, tragically, compromised by her illness, manipulated by a daughter seeking to profit from her mother's vulnerable state?" The implication made my blood boil, that I had somehow coerced Mom, preyed on her weakness. It was obscene, insulting to everything Mom had been. I sat perfectly still, hands clenched together under the table where no one could see them shake. I let my shoulders curve slightly inward, let my eyes drop to the papers in front of me. Every inch of body language screamed defeat. Greer rose to object, to present our counter-evidence testimony from Mom's doctors confirming her mental clarity, statements from the attorney who had drafted the will, records showing she had made similar financial decisions with perfect competence right up until her final week. Judge Crow interrupted her every third sentence. "Counselor, we have heard enough medical opinions. Move on." "Your Honor, this testimony is directly relevant." "I will decide what is relevant, Miss Halliday. Continue or sit down." I watched it unfold like a play I had seen before, knowing how the script would end. Crow dismissed every piece of evidence we presented. He sustained Prescott's objections before Greer even finished speaking. He checked his watch repeatedly, signaling his boredom with anything that might support Mom's wishes. Dad caught my eye across the aisle. His expression was pure triumph, the look of a man who had known all along that he could not lose. His eyes seemed to say, "See, sweetheart, I told you, you never could beat me, you never will." I held his gaze for 3 seconds, then looked away. Let him see submission, let him taste victory. This was the trap, the bait. I needed them both, Dad and Crow, to believe they had won absolutely. Needed them so confident in their corruption that they would drop their guard completely. Only then would the hammer fall with maximum impact. Under the table, my index finger tapped against my thigh in a steady rhythm. 4 beats, pause. 4 beats, pause. The calming technique I had learned in law school for managing courtroom stress. But now it meant something different. I was not panicking. I was counting down. Greer glanced at me once, caught the tiny movement, and understood. She shifted tactics, softening her arguments, letting Prescott score points, playing the game. By 11:30, he began gathering his papers with the deliberate movements of a man preparing to deliver a verdict. The courtroom went silent except for the whisper of documents and the creak of his leather chair. "Based on the evidence presented," Crow announced, his voice resonating with false authority, "this court finds that substantial doubt exists regarding Cecilia Thorne's testamentary capacity at the time of will execution. Furthermore, the financial arrangements appear unduly influenced by. He was giving Dad everything, the savings, the townhouse, the legacy. He was about to erase Mom from legal existence, reduce her final wishes to a footnote in a corrupt judge's ledger. The rage that had been building for 8 months since Mom's death, since Dad's lawsuit, since every dismissive word and biased ruling crystallized into perfect, cold clarity. I stood up. The scrape of my chair against the floor cut through Crow's pronouncement like a knife through silk. Every head in the courtroom turned toward me. "Miss Kensington," Crow said, irritation bleeding through his judicial mask, "you will sit down, and—" "Your Honor," my voice came out steady, clear, with an edge of steel I did not know I possessed. I did not wait for his permission to continue. I looked straight at the bench, ignoring my father's confused glare from the plaintiff's table. "Amber horizon," I said, my voice calm and clear, cutting through the sudden silence. The effect was instantaneous, and more devastating than I had even imagined. All the color drained from Thaddeus Crow's face. In my years of practicing law, I had never seen anyone go that pale that fast, like watching ink dissolve in water. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. Across the courtroom, my father made a strangled noise. I turned just in time to see his hand, always so steady when signing documents that destroyed lives, begin to tremble violently. His Mont Blanc pen clattered to the floor, the sound echoing in the sudden, suffocating silence. "What?" Prescott started, confusion written across his face. "Court is recessed." Crow's voice cracked on the last word. He gripped the edge of his bench, knuckles white. Immediately, "Everyone out, now." The gallery erupted in confused whispers. Prescott looked between Crow and my father, clearly trying to understand what had just detonated in his carefully constructed case. "Your Honor, I do not understand," Prescott began. His hand shook as he pointed toward the door. "Miss Kensington, Mr. Kensington, my chambers, immediately." Greer caught my arm as I passed her. I gave her a firm nod and met her eyes with a look that told her everything she needed to know. "I have got this." I nodded once. She squeezed my hand and stepped back, moving toward the exit with the rest of the confused spectators. I had told her to wait outside, that this part I had to do alone. Some confrontations require witnesses, others require privacy. I moved past Prescott, who had been duly instructed to wait outside his eyes, tracking me with a look of confusion laced with a sudden, sharp fear. The walk to Crow's chambers felt like miles. Portraits of former judges peered down from the dark walnut-paneled walls. My father hadn't looked at me yet. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. Behind us, Crow's footsteps were heavy, uneven. The moment the door closed behind us, my father whirled on me. "Where did you—" He stopped himself, years of courtroom discipline wrestling with panic. "Olivia, you do not understand what you are doing." "Do I not?" I crossed my arms, leaning against Crow's mahogany desk. The irony was not lost on me standing in a corrupt judge's chambers, about to use the truth as a weapon. Mom would have appreciated that. "I understand perfectly, Dad. Or should I call you Major Kensington? That was what they called you back then, was it not?" Crow had collapsed into his leather chair, head in his hands. "How?" he croaked. "Mom kept excellent records, diary entries, photographs, dates, times, coordinates. Everything about Operation Iron Harbor, everything about what happened in that warehouse in late 1994. My father's face had gone from pale to gray. Cecilia would not what? Would not protect herself? Would not document the truth? My voice stayed level, but I felt the rage burning beneath it, years of watching him manipulate, watching him lie, watching him destroy Mom's reputation even in death. She was a signals specialist, Dad. She knew how to gather intelligence. She just never used it because she believed in doing the right thing. I pushed off the desk, taking a step closer. Both men looked diminished somehow, smaller than they had moments ago. But I am not Mom. I have spent the last 8 months watching you try to steal her legacy, watching you paint her as incompetent, watching you use your old buddy here to rig the system in your favor. I glanced at Crow, who still would not meet my eyes. "I learned you taught me that sometimes the only way to win is to play the game better than your opponent." "Olivia, please." My father's voice held a note I had never heard before, genuine fear. If this comes out, you both go down, hard." I let that sink in for a moment. Judge Crow faces federal investigation for his role in covering up that operation. You lose your law license, your reputation, probably your freedom, and your new wife Tiffany? Well, I am guessing her prenup does not cover husband imprisoned for federal crimes. Crow finally looked up. His eyes were bloodshot. "What do you want?" I had rehearsed this moment 100 times in my head. I had practiced staying calm, keeping my voice level. No screaming, no tears. Just cold, calculated justice. First, Alistair withdraws the lawsuit against Mom's estate. Immediately. Today. My father opened his mouth to protest, but I kept going. Second, you both sign affidavits accepting the will as valid and acknowledging that Cecilia Thorne was of completely sound mind when she executed it. Olivia. I am not finished. I held up 3 fingers. Third, Judge Crow, you voluntarily recuse yourself from this case. You cite a previously undisclosed personal relationship with one of the parties. The case gets transferred to another judge, someone who is not on my father's payroll. Crow's face flushed red, but he said nothing. And fourth, I paused, savoring this moment. You issue a public apology, both of you, for questioning Mom's mental capacity. For dragging her name through the mud, for using the courts as your personal playground. The silence stretched out. My father was the first to speak. And if we do this, if we agree to everything, then what happened at Iron Harbor stays buried. I met his eyes directly. The records stay hidden. Your secret stays safe. You get to keep pretending you are an upstanding citizen, instead of someone who helped cover up an accident that was not really an accident at all. I watched him absorb that, the confirmation that I knew, that I understood exactly what they had done, what they had hidden, whose bodies were buried in which closets. You would really do this? Crow asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Use classified information, extort federal officials. I am not extorting anyone, Your Honor. The title tasted like ash in my mouth. I am offering you a choice. Do the right thing now, or have the truth come out in federal court. Your call. My father looked at Crow. Something passed between them, some wordless acknowledgement of defeat. After 30 years of wielding power, of manipulating systems, of crushing anyone who stood in their way, they had been checkmated by a 30-year-old public defender with her mother's diary. Fine, my father said finally. The word came out strangled. We will do it, all of it. Today, I pressed. The notice of voluntary dismissal gets filed before this courthouse closes. The recusal gets submitted tomorrow morning. The affidavits get notarized by end of business Friday. Crow nodded slowly, mechanically. And the apology? Written statement to the Seattle Times. You will call it a misunderstanding and praise Mom's legacy. Make it convincing. I turned toward the door, then paused. There was one more thing I needed to say, not for them, but for myself, for Mom. You know what the saddest part is? I looked back at my father. Mom loved you, even when you betrayed her for Tiffany, even through that brutal divorce when you stripped her of nearly everything you two had built together. She just endured it. She took it all in silence, never once trying to strike back. She chose to be broken so I would not have to be. She kept those records as insurance, but she never planned to use them. That was who she was. Decent, honorable, everything you pretended to be. His jaw worked, but no words came out. I am not going to let you destroy what she built just because you cannot stand the idea of her choosing someone else, even if that someone was her own daughter. This inheritance? This townhouse? It was never about the money for you. It was about control, about winning, about erasing her choices even in death. I pulled open the door. You have 4 hours to file that dismissal. If I do not see it in the system by 5 p.m., every document I have goes to the federal prosecutors, the state bar, and the media. Are we clear? 2 nods. 2 broken men who had finally met someone willing to fight as dirty as they had always played. I walked out of that courthouse with my head high, heels clicking against marble. Greer was waiting by the main doors. Well? She asked. It is over, I said, and for the first time in 8 months, I felt like I could breathe. The dominoes fell faster than I had anticipated. By the time the courthouse closed that afternoon, the notice of voluntary dismissal had appeared in the system. Gavin Prescott's aggressive strategy evaporated instantly. The next morning, Judge Crow's recusal was official, citing previously undisclosed personal relationships. The case was transferred to Judge Constance Winthrop, a woman known for her zero-tolerance policy regarding legal nonsense. The hearing took less than 20 minutes. Miss Halliday, Judge Winthrop said, closing the file with a decisive snap. This will was properly executed and coherent. I see no grounds to question its validity. Probate is granted immediately. Just like that, it was done. The $83,000 in savings, the townhouse in Tacoma, the oak chest, and finally the half share of the $5 million beachfront villa. All of it was officially mine. My father had not just lost the case. He had been forced to hand back the very pieces of my mother's life he had thought he had successfully stolen. But justice did not stop at the courtroom doors. Later that week, a local legal reporter connected the dots between Olivia Kensington and Thaddeus Crow, uncovering their shared history in the Judge Advocate General's Corps. The story ran on the front page of the Seattle Times. Local judges' ties to prominent attorney raise ethics questions. The fallout was swift. The Washington State Bar Association opened an investigation. 3 major corporate clients publicly dropped my father's firm, causing the reputation he had built over a lifetime to collapse like a sandcastle at high tide. And Tiffany? She filed for divorce on Friday afternoon, protected by a prenuptial agreement that allowed her to cut her losses before the ship sank completely. I sat in my mother's townhouse, staring at the message from Greer. I felt a complete release. I was no longer living under my father's shadow or the paralyzing pain of losing my mother. I had overcome my weakness. I finally understood that justice sometimes requires the courage to use the truth as a sharp weapon. The inheritance sat in my bank account, $83,000. It was more money than I needed for a fresh start. I pulled up my laptop and initiated the plan I had been forming. I allocated the full $83,000 to establish the Cecilia Thorne Integrity Fund, dedicated to supporting victims of judicial bias and women fighting impossible probate battles. To sustain it, the fund would be bolstered by a monthly contribution of $5,000 sourced from 50% of the coastal villa's net profits after all operating expenses were settled. It was the perfect way to honor her. Mom had spent her life helping others quietly. Now, her legacy would do so loudly. I sat in the living room beside the oak chest. I had wiped it clean, removing the dust and the secrets it had held for so long. The hidden compartment was empty then, the leverage stored safely away, but the wood still felt warm and solid under my hand. I felt Mom smiling. I picked up the pen and opened a fresh journal, writing down the lesson that had cost me my innocence, but given me my freedom. Justice is not just about exposing everything sometimes, it lies in when and how you use the truth. I looked out at the city lights, wondering about others who might find themselves in my position. I wondered if they would have made the same choice, keeping the secret as leverage to protect what mattered, or if they would have burned it all down with the truth